Well, in our readings, we were reminded of the two great commandments. Love God and love one's neighbor as oneself. The section of the Mosaic Law that is read today focuses on a couple aspects of these two great commandments. Specifically, no other divinity is to be worshipped except God. Secondly, the need to treat others fairly, especially the widows, the orphans, the aliens, and the poor. The Mosaic Law, including the Ten Commandments, runs through the first 4 of the 5 books of the Torah. Those are the first 5 books of the Bible, known as the Torah, and Torah is the Jewish term for law. Although some of the prescriptions are quite detailed, it can be simplified by placing worship of God in the primary position and care of others, including aliens, in a secondary position. Today's passage from Exodus gives us that glimpse into both of these two important areas. In the gospel passage, the one that I just read to you, Jesus responds to a trick question posed to him by the Pharisees. They were hoping that he would mention a detailed part of the Mosaic Law as what he considered the most important stipulation of that law. If he focused on a very small principle, they would be able to say, well, what about this other aspect with which Moses has stressed? Instead, Jesus generalizes and summarizes all the Mosaic Law into these 2 phrases: complete and total love of God, love and concern for others. These 2 commandments are further simplified by Jesus' words in John's Gospel and the writings of Paul. The simplification is simply this: love. This love is not the gushy emotion that one feels when one is close to an individual and returns that same emotion to that person. This love is not the physical attraction to another person that we're used to hearing about. The love that Jesus is referring to, and as described throughout the Scriptures, is a decision to do and to be for another. The highest form of love, of course, is giving totally of oneself for another. Thus, martyrdom, witnessing by one's life, is the supreme form of love of God, and giving of one's life for another person is the greatest example of love of thy neighbor. Love is more of an attitude which leads to action. It is a response from knowing one is loved by God. True love is a caring for another in the way that God has cared for us. Jesus says in John's Gospel, love one another as I have loved you. Chapter 13. Jesus is truly love incarnate. He is the human embodiment of God's love for us. In his willingness to be born as a human and live among us, point number 1, how he loves us. In his very lifestyle of compassionate caring for those whom he meets, number 2, in how he is true love. This all climaxes in his death and his resurrection. We must imitate Jesus, and we must love as he loved. That is easy to say, but the practical application, I understand, is very difficult. It means we must be constantly conscious of our actions and examine what we do and why we are doing it. Often, we act without thinking. We let our emotions control our actions. We need to consciously look at our feelings and to try and understand their meaning. Then we can make a decision on how we will live out what we have experienced and what we have processed. Being a follower of Jesus is a daily, minute-by-minute choice we must make. It means thinking of God and others as much as, or even more than, we think of ourselves. It is acting like our God, who is love.